Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful family. If you fiercely believe that absolute true love always successfully deserves a highly beautiful second chance, and you absolutely love highly explosive stories of ultimate redemption and pure resilience, you absolutely must hear this incredible story. Please smash that like button to strongly support our content, subscribe to our channel, and let me know exactly what you would do if you woke up in a hospital and your ex was your doctor down in the comments below. Let's get directly into the billionaire's ultimate sacrifice. Part 1. The Ghost in the ER. The highly steady, low humming entirely of the highly expensive private jet was miraculously, almost incredibly soothing. But Damien Rothschild absolutely could not highly possibly peacefully sleep. He intensely stared completely out the small window, directly at the highly dazzling, colorful mosaic entirely of bright city lights, completely below his highly exhausted, bloodshot, piercing eyes. Entirely, despite the highly comfortable, expensive leather seats and the highly premium vintage champagne directly to which he absolutely, had not absolutely, even highly casually touched. Massive Boston, absolutely. Had to absolutely be absolutely somewhere perfectly down, completely below. A highly quiet, significantly calmer, beautiful place, but incredibly, highly packed completely with highly painful memories. He hadn't safely returned directly to exactly this massive city entirely in miraculous, almost exactly 8 agonizing years. Completely since the highly dark night, he had highly ruthlessly left absolutely everything completely behind. The highly luxurious cabin was incredibly cool, but a highly freezing, cold drop, entirely of cold sweat, violently rolled completely down the fragile back entirely of his heavy neck. His highly elite, strict assistant had highly desperately attempted entirely to highly aggressively dissuade him completely from exactly this highly massive trip. Highly, simply, highly generously, let US highly officially send absolutely another highly elite team entirely to highly meticulously inspect the highly massive site. She had explicitly stated, "You absolutely do not highly desperately need entirely to confidently go completely yourself." But exactly this absolutely was not completely entirely about highly complex corporate business. Absolutely not highly. Truly. It had absolutely been a highly incredibly long massive time. Damien heavily leaned completely back and highly tightly closed his piercing eyes. He was completely, utterly exhausted. Entirely by highly luxurious hotel rooms that absolutely never, ever physically felt exactly like a highly safe home. Completely exhausted, completely by the highly prominent Forbes articles featuring his handsome face. Highly arrogantly calling him a highly brilliant genius, a highly bold visionary, but entirely in his absolute own highly private life. He profoundly felt exactly like a highly pathetic ghost, a highly terrifying billionaire, a highly brilliant genius, a highly elite media ghost. The highly massive headlines absolutely were perfectly there, absolutely, of course, but completely after the highly intense public attention, highly inevitably faded completely away. Perfectly, there was absolutely no one completely with whom entirely to highly peacefully share the highly deafening silence. The highly expensive jet highly smoothly landed absolutely just completely after midnight, exactly a highly few short agonizing hours significantly later, confidently standing perfectly behind the highly imposing podium entirely of a highly exclusive gala, entirely in the massive downtown, highly officially organized completely by a highly elite, high-tech investment fund. Damien beautifully smiled directly at the highly aggressive cameras, highly politely shook the strong hands entirely of highly prominent city officials, and highly graciously thanked the highly elite business leaders entirely for their highly warm welcome. Completely flawless, absolutely perfect. But exactly when the highly eloquent speech completely ended, and he confidently stepped completely down, completely from the massive stage. Absolutely everything entirely in the highly massive room aggressively began entirely to completely, violently blur. His massive heart completely, violently stopped. And exactly then, aggressively, began entirely to violently pound. He highly desperately held completely onto the highly sharp edge entirely of the massive table. The massive world completely around him completely, violently spun. "Damien? Mr. Rothschild!" A highly distant, muffled voice loudly called completely out, completely from absolutely somewhere. He absolutely did not actively answer. Highly suddenly, the bright lights violently became way too incredibly bright, and the highly decorated ceiling was absolutely no longer the highly beautiful chandelier-lit grand ballroom, exactly as it had officially been perfectly at the highly exclusive gala. It was incredibly white, completely, utterly sterile. A highly loud, terrifying buzzing loudly sounded perfectly overhead, and absolutely everything completely, violently hurt. His highly critical blood pressure is completely, violently dropping. Let's highly rapidly stabilize his highly fragile condition completely until we highly successfully get the highly advanced scan results. I absolutely already, highly urgently, called the highly elite radiology department. The highly elite cardiologists absolutely must highly actively be perfectly on highly strict standby. Dr. Victoria Vance confidently stood perfectly at the absolute foot entirely of the highly sterile gurney, highly aggressively restraining her highly sharp, rapid movements. Her beautiful dark hair was highly practically gathered entirely in her highly familiar, low ponytail, and her highly crisp white medical coat violently fluttered completely with highly absolute purpose. It was miraculously, almost exactly 2 a.m., but she visually looked exactly as if she had literally just confidently stepped completely out entirely of a highly advanced military headquarters. Absolutely not completely out, entirely of a highly quiet break room. "Highly critical vital signs?" she sharply asked. "Exactly 90/60 and completely, violently dropping. The highly severe arrhythmia is violently intensifying. Highly aggressively. Start highly advanced intravenous fluids, but incredibly gradually. I highly desperately need a highly complete, massive examination. Highly urgently invite the highly elite cardiologist. Highly desperately wait." She completely, violently interrupted her highly elite team, intensely staring completely directly, entirely, at the highly unconscious patient, whom they were highly rapidly rolling directly into highly sterile Trauma Room 3. The massive world completely, violently narrowed, completely down highly exclusively, completely to his handsome face. Her heavy breath completely, violently caught. No. Absolutely not him. Absolutely not perfectly here. The massive man, peacefully lying completely unconscious, perfectly right, perfectly in front, entirely of her. Highly securely connected directly to the highly advanced monitors. whose highly erratic, violent heartbeat was highly chaotically displaying perfectly on the bright screen, was officially Damien Rothschild. Victoria confidently took exactly one massive step, completely back. Her heavy breath completely caught entirely in her dry throat. Her delicate fingers completely, violently, clenching completely into highly tight fists for exactly one highly terrifying second. Absolutely just entirely for a highly microscopic moment. The massive room physically felt incredibly distant. Damien. He had miraculously become significantly larger than completely before. Completely around his piercing eyes confidently appeared highly faint lines that she absolutely did not intimately remember. His sharp jaw was highly roughly covered completely with highly dark stubble, and his pale skin was incredibly ashen, completely under the highly bright hospital lamps. But it was completely, undeniably him. In exactly that, perfectly, there were absolutely zero highly pathetic doubts. "Dr. Vance," a highly polite nurse loudly called her, highly sharply shaking her completely out entirely of her massive trance. "Let's highly rapidly continue the highly massive examination," Victoria stated, highly calmly, professionally nodding. "Yes, let's confidently go." Exactly 20 agonizing minutes significantly later. She safely stood perfectly by the large window entirely of the highly quiet observation room, intensely watching exactly as the highly complex test results entirely of Damien highly rapidly scrolled completely across the bright screen. His highly erratic heart rhythm had incredibly, slightly, highly, beautifully stabilized. But perfectly, there were highly concerning, massive irregularities that absolutely could not highly possibly be highly safely ignored. Highly possibly, they had absolutely been highly toxically caused, completely by highly massive stress. Highly possibly, absolutely, something completely else. He absolutely must highly strictly remain entirely in the highly secure hospital perfectly overnight, stated Dr. Eleanor, confidently standing perfectly behind her. "Do you highly genuinely think he will highly happily like exactly that?" Victoria absolutely did not actively answer. Eleanor confidently stepped significantly closer. "You profoundly know exactly who he truly is. Absolutely isn't exactly that highly officially correct?" "Absolutely, of course," she replied, way too incredibly hastily. "He is officially Damien Rothschild. I highly frequently read highly prominent Forbes." "No, exactly what I highly explicitly mean is, you intimately know him." Victoria absolutely did not actively move completely from her highly solid spot. She highly tightly clenched her delicate jaw. "Highly comfortably settle him perfectly in. I will highly personally conduct the highly complex conversation exactly when he highly successfully wakes completely up." Part 2. The 8-year ghost. In the highly early morning, the highly massive regional hospital was incredibly quiet. The highly dedicated night shift nurses actively spoke incredibly softly. Their highly comfortable shoes highly softly tapping completely on the highly polished floor. Victoria smoothly moved completely through the highly long corridors. Exactly like a highly silent ghost. Her highly official badge highly silently attached completely to her highly advanced pager. She absolutely did not confidently go directly to his highly private room. Absolutely not, completely immediately. Instead, she confidently stood completely outside entirely for a highly incredibly long, massive time. Highly obsessively reading completely over and completely over completely, again the highly famous name, perfectly on the highly strict medical chart. exactly as if it could highly miraculously somehow completely change. Damien Rothschild. Exactly 8 agonizing years. Absolutely no highly pathetic contacts. Absolutely no highly logical explanations. One highly beautiful day, he had highly happily laughed entirely in her highly modest kitchen, highly passionately talking entirely about exactly how he was highly actively going entirely to highly, miraculously start absolutely something incredibly serious. And the absolute next highly terrifying day, he was completely, permanently gone. He had frantically fled the massive city, highly ruthlessly abandoned her, highly ruthlessly abandoned absolutely everything, flawlessly including the highly innocent, beautiful child, entirely about whose highly absolute existence he absolutely didn't even highly vaguely suspect. She highly aggressively squeezed the highly official chart significantly tighter entirely in her soft hand, smoothly turned completely around, and confidently walked completely away. It was miraculously almost exactly 6 a.m. Exactly. When Damien finally, highly painfully, woke completely up. Right perfectly. Right perfectly. Next, completely to him, the highly advanced machines highly quietly beeped. And entirely in the massive room, it was absolutely, still highly comfortably dim. He rapidly blinked, highly painfully wincing, completely from the highly severe dryness entirely in his dry throat. His piercing gaze completely, violently, fell completely upon the beautiful woman, peacefully standing perfectly at the absolute foot entirely of the highly sterile bed. He highly sharply squinted. She absolutely did not actively move. Victoria! His deep voice was literally barely explicitly heard, incredibly hoarse and completely cracked. She safely remained completely silent, highly simply, intensely looking directly at him completely, with exactly such a highly impenetrable, freezing expression perfectly on her beautiful face, that he profoundly felt significantly colder than the highly cold IV fluid, highly actively dripping directly into his weak arm. I absolutely must highly actively be peacefully sleeping, he whispered incredibly softly, or completely dead. No, she finally stated completely with a highly calm, but incredibly distant, beautiful voice. Absolutely just entirely in the highly sterile hospital completely again. He violently flinched highly exactly upon clearly hearing her beautiful voice. What exactly violently happened? You completely, violently lost highly absolute consciousness entirely at a highly public, exclusive event. Highly, probably entirely due, completely, to highly severe arrhythmia. Highly toxically caused, completely by highly massive stress. You are incredibly lucky that absolutely someone highly urgently called the highly rapid ambulance exactly on highly precious time. Damien highly desperately attempted entirely to highly painfully sit completely up, violently wincing. Victoria highly instinctively, confidently stepped completely forward, but highly abruptly, completely, stopped completely herself. He vividly saw exactly it. He vividly saw absolutely everything perfectly on her beautiful face. Exactly this highly impenetrable, massive wall that she had highly aggressively erected completely over him. He intimately knew exactly this highly massive wall. He had highly actively helped entirely to highly maliciously put exactly it perfectly. There. I absolutely did not highly actively expect, he confidently began. I absolutely never, ever highly creatively thought that we would absolutely ever vividly see absolutely each other completely again. I absolutely neither, she highly sharply finished completely for him, fiercely crossing her fragile arms. A highly heavy pause. He heavily swallowed incredibly hard. You visually look incredibly well. Victoria completely ignored the highly pathetic remark. You are highly officially hospitalized entirely for highly strict observation, entirely during the highly quiet night. We will highly meticulously monitor the highly complex work entirely of your massive heart, and exactly in the highly early morning, we will highly officially conduct highly advanced tests. Absolutely, someone will highly rapidly contact you incredibly soon. She smoothly turned entirely to safely leave. Victoria, please, highly desperately, wait. She completely stopped perfectly in the heavy doorway, but she absolutely did not actively look completely back. I absolutely did not confidently come directly here entirely to highly actively find you. I completely know, she stated incredibly quietly. Exactly that would highly strictly require highly pure intention. She confidently left completely before he could highly successfully, explicitly say, absolutely, even exactly one single, highly pathetic heavy word significantly more. Outside the heavy door entirely of the highly private room, her heavy breath completely, violently caught. When she smoothly turned the highly quiet corner, she heavily leaned completely against the highly cold wall, fiercely pressing her soft hands completely against the hard wall and highly tightly closing her piercing eyes. Damien was perfectly here, in the highly sterile hospital, completely alive, and absolutely everything that she had highly miraculously achieved. Her highly pure calm, her highly flawless composure. The highly carefully, meticulously hidden massive pain aggressively began entirely to completely, violently change. Because the highly toxic past, exactly this highly specific time, absolutely did not highly, politely knock. It completely, violently, burst completely imperfectly on a highly sterile stretcher. Damien woke up to find his ex-girlfriend is the doctor who saved him. What do you think Victoria should do? Forgive him or walk away? Tell us below. Part 3. The 7-Year Secret. The highly bright morning sun beautifully filtered completely softly, completely, through the highly narrow cracks entirely of the highly sterile blinds, perfectly on the small window, entirely, of Damien. Beautifully casting highly soft, warm stripes completely onto the highly sterile room. He incredibly slowly, smoothly moved, rapidly blinking, intensely looking completely directly at the completely unfamiliar, highly white ceiling, completely before highly smoothly turning his handsome head directly toward the heavy door. It was incredibly slightly ajar, exactly highly sufficiently enough, entirely so, exactly, that highly perfectly inside, beautifully penetrated the highly rich aroma entirely of hot coffee and highly sterile antiseptic. He had highly anxiously expected entirely to vividly see a highly polite nurse. Instead, he vividly saw Victoria. Her beautiful hair was highly neatly, perfectly styled, entirely in her highly crisp medical coat. But entirely in her piercing eyes perfectly there was absolutely something incredibly quiet and completely unreadable. You are highly officially awake, she stated. Damien highly desperately attempted entirely to highly painfully straighten, completely up. Literally barely. She confidently approached the highly sterile bed and intensely looked directly at the highly advanced monitor. Her delicate fingers smoothly moved completely with highly clinical, absolute precision. I highly clearly see that you have highly miraculously retained your highly pathetic sense entirely of toxic humor, she murmured. It is officially exactly one entirely of the highly few short things that I absolutely have not completely, violently lost. Victoria absolutely did not beautifully smile. You completely suffered a highly severe attack, probably highly toxically caused completely by highly massive exhaustion, severe dehydration, and highly massive stress. Perfectly, there are absolutely no highly structural, massive abnormalities, but we will highly meticulously observe you entirely for exactly one significantly more highly agonizing day, and for exactly that you will highly successfully be completely free entirely to safely leave. Damien fiercely nodded, highly attentively, intensely watching her. Do absolutely not highly pathetically waste your highly precious time. I successfully possess incredibly, highly little, entirely of exactly it. He violently hesitated. You visually look. She slowly looked completely up, directly at him, completely, utterly impassively. And you visually look exactly as if you have completely, tragically forgotten exactly how entirely to highly responsibly, safely take highly proper care entirely of completely yourself. A highly heavy silence violently hung perfectly between them. Then he heavily exhaled incredibly slowly and highly uncertainly. Victoria, I profoundly know that I officially possess absolutely zero highly legal right entirely to highly actively ask. But can we highly possibly actively talk? Highly seriously actively talk? She completely, violently froze entirely for exactly one highly terrifying second. Then, incredibly slightly gently, shook her delicate head. You absolutely should highly peacefully rest. He smoothly leaned significantly closer. Please, you highly fiercely deserve the absolute truth. The beautiful voice entirely of Victoria was incredibly soft, but incredibly sharp. The absolute truth, Damien? You completely, violently disappeared. Absolutely no highly pathetic calls. Absolutely no highly pathetic messages. Absolutely no highly logical explanations. You highly ruthlessly left me completely alone, entirely in a highly massive storm, completely without a highly protective umbrella. And you highly arrogantly expected that I would highly pathetically wait perfectly by the small window. His handsome face completely, violently twisted. I absolutely did not completely know exactly how entirely to highly bravely stay. I absolutely did not completely know exactly how entirely to highly successfully take you completely with me. Victoria confidently stepped completely back. Then you absolutely should have highly bravely shown the highly basic, pathetic decency entirely to highly honestly, explicitly tell me exactly about exactly it. To highly generously give me the highly fragile opportunity entirely to highly independently decide completely for myself exactly what I could highly possibly successfully handle. She smoothly turned and confidently headed directly toward the heavy door, completely before she confidently exited. He highly aggressively spoke completely again. Do you highly successfully possess absolutely anyone? Victoria completely, violently silenced. The highly complex answer was completely multifaceted. Highly technically, no. But highly emotionally, no. Highly complexly, yes. MIA, she explicitly stated. And my highly demanding work. Exactly that is completely 100% enough. His deep voice was literally barely explicitly heard. The highly beautiful spine entirely of Mia. Victoria completely, violently tensed. She absolutely did not fiercely want entirely to highly openly pronounce her highly beautiful name. Absolutely not exactly like exactly this. Absolutely not perfectly here. I highly desperately need to confidently go. Exactly this highly specific time he absolutely did not. Highly loudly call. Completely out. Completely to her. He simply highly peacefully let her completely go. Victoria smoothly slipped directly into the highly small quiet lounge. Perfectly right. Perfectly next. Completely to the highly busy nurse station, and heavily collapsed completely into a highly comfortable corner chair. Her expensive phone violently vibrated completely with a highly secure message, completely from Eleanor. Mia highly desperately wants to explicitly know exactly if you will safely return completely home incredibly early. Tonight. She is highly enthusiastically baking highly delicious cookies, entirely in the highly fun shape, entirely of highly fierce dinosaurs. Victoria beautifully smiled, incredibly weakly, and highly rapidly typed completely back. Highly explicitly tell her that I will highly desperately try. Highly safely save me a highly fierce stegosaurus. Her delicate fingers highly violently hovered entirely, for absolutely another highly brief second, perfectly over the bright screen. Then she completely, violently, deleted the highly secure message and highly aggressively pressed send. She absolutely was not completely ready, entirely, to safely return completely home. Absolutely not completely yet, at the absolute other, highly distant end, entirely, of the highly massive hospital. Dr. Oliver highly smoothly handed the highly strict medical history entirely of Damien, completely to a highly polite nurse, and intensely glanced entirely in the highly direct direction entirely of the highly private room. He absolutely did not completely know the absolute entire highly epic story, but he profoundly knew exactly what a highly shattered, completely broken, fragile heart exactly visually looked exactly like. And exactly this was incredibly, infinitely far, completely, from actively being the highly absolute end. Part 4. The 7-year-old dinosaur expert. That exact evening, Damien sat peacefully highly propped, completely up perfectly on the highly sterile bed, highly intently reading the highly informative brochure that Victoria had highly carelessly left perfectly on his highly sterile tray. Highly strict discharge instructions. A highly firm reminder, entirely, to highly responsibly safely take highly expensive medications, and a highly blank empty line entirely for the highly official emergency contact person. He intensely stared directly at the highly empty, blank space, entirely for a highly incredibly long, massive time. Finally, he confidently reached entirely for the highly cheap pen and highly proudly wrote. Then, completely after a highly heavy pause, he softly asked completely himself, if she absolutely will, highly possibly accept me. He highly gently placed the highly informative book completely down and heavily leaned completely back. In the highly sterile hospital completely peacefully reigned highly pure silence. The highly deafening silence highly violently reminded him entirely of exactly how incredibly, highly strong, his highly massive regrets had highly tragically become. Exactly 8 agonizing years completely ago, he had confidently left, highly arrogantly, genuinely believing that he was highly mercifully sparing her. But exactly now, highly clearly, vividly, seeing the highly massive weight entirely in the piercing eyes, entirely, of Victoria. He highly agonizingly wondered exactly if his highly cowardly disappearance hadn't completely, violently broken absolutely both entirely of them. Damien safely remained perfectly entirely in the highly sterile bed, exactly when the heavy door smoothly opened completely anew. Victoria confidently entered the highly private room completely, with a highly thick folder securely in her soft hands. She visually looked exactly as if she hadn't peacefully slept entirely at absolutely all. But her highly imposing presence, absolutely still completely, beautifully, filled the massive room exactly like highly pure magnetic gravity. You are actively being highly officially discharged exactly tomorrow, highly early morning, she stated, smoothly opening the highly thick folder completely with highly official documents. Absolutely not actively looking completely directly entirely at him. Highly critical vital signs are completely stable. Highly erratic heart rhythm is completely normal. Damien intensely looked directly at her entirely for a highly incredibly long, massive time. I absolutely did not highly actively expect entirely to highly shockingly find you perfectly here, he stated. Victoria highly stubbornly continued, highly actively reading. You highly officially listed me exactly as your highly official contact, entirely for highly terrifying emergencies. He beautifully smiled incredibly weakly. Did you highly astutely notice exactly that? I highly astutely noticed absolutely everything. In her beautiful voice perfectly, there was exactly now absolutely something significantly sharper. Exactly, like a highly lethal edge that she could absolutely no longer highly successfully smooth completely out. Damien incredibly slightly smoothly leaned completely forward, highly gently resting his massive hands perfectly on the highly soft blanket. Victoria, he stated completely with a highly quiet, deep voice, may I highly politely ask you entirely about absolutely something? She finally slowly looked completely up directly at him. He violently hesitated, then softly asked, Is she officially mine? In the massive room completely, violently fell highly dead. Silence. Victoria absolutely did not actively answer. She highly tightly clenched her delicate jaw, highly aggressively pressing her soft fingers completely against the highly thick folder, completely, until the highly sharp edges, completely, violently, bent. I honestly do not completely know entirely about exactly what you are highly actively talking, she stated. Damien highly gently shook his handsome head. Yes, you highly absolutely do. He highly attentively, intensely watched her. I absolutely did not safely return entirely to highly maliciously cause highly toxic harm. I absolutely didn't even completely know that I would safely return completely until I completely, violently, lost highly absolute consciousness perfectly on the massive stage and highly painfully woke completely up, intensely looking directly at the highly white ceiling entirely in your highly sterile hospital. Victoria smoothly turned directly toward the heavy door. I highly desperately need to highly successfully check absolutely another highly critical patient. I vividly saw her, he stated completely, before she could highly possibly successfully exit. She completely stopped. She was visually looking exactly like you. Victoria highly tightly closed her piercing eyes. I highly genuinely thought that I successfully possessed a highly terrifying hallucination. Damien, I confidently left entirely because I highly genuinely thought that I was highly fiercely protecting you, he highly suddenly stated. I completely know. Exactly this absolutely does not highly successfully actively make exactly it completely right. But my beautiful life exactly then, the highly massive company, the highly catastrophic crash, the highly aggressive press. They highly toxically called me highly lethal poison. And exactly so, you completely, violently disappeared. Victoria highly abruptly, completely turned completely around, completely without absolutely any highly pathetic phone call. Absolutely, without absolutely even highly honestly, explicitly telling me exactly where you were highly actively going. I highly genuinely thought that your highly quiet disappearance would highly successfully ensure your highly absolute safety. I highly genuinely thought that, exactly if I could highly successfully build absolutely something completely else. Exactly if I could highly successfully safely return, exactly when absolutely everything completely ended. I absolutely did not highly actively expect that exactly it would highly agonizingly take so incredibly, highly long. The beautiful voice entirely of Victoria violently trembled. Exactly 8 agonizing years. Exactly that is an absolute entire massive lifetime. The deep voice entirely of Damien, absolutely, also violently trembled. I highly agonizingly lived absolutely every single massive day, highly deeply thinking entirely about you. A highly long, deafening pause. Victoria smoothly turned directly toward the heavy door. Her soft hand highly dangerously hovered perfectly near the highly cold handle. She is exactly 7, she stated, absolutely not actively looking completely back. The heavy breath entirely of Damien, completely, violently out. The beautiful voice entirely of Victoria, beautifully softened, violently trembling. Her highly beautiful name is officially EA. Then she smoothly opened the heavy door and confidently left. Damien safely remained peacefully sitting entirely in highly stunned, absolute silence. His highly beautiful name highly loudly echoing completely through the highly dead silence. MIA. He whispered exactly. Exactly. Highly magical time. Highly, simply, entirely, to profoundly, feel perfectly on his dry tongue the highly beautiful name that he had absolutely never, ever completely known. The highly innocent biological daughter that he had absolutely never, ever highly successfully met. Damien just found out he has a 7-year-old daughter. Do you think he will give up his billionaire lifestyle to be a father? Tell us your predictions below. Part 5. The Ice Cream Truce. The highly bright Saturday air was incredibly warm. A highly light, refreshing breeze beautifully blew, highly seamlessly bringing the highly faint, sweet smell entirely of pure salt, completely from the highly beautiful river, and absolutely something incredibly sweet, completely from the highly busy shops. Damien intensely looked directly at his highly expensive watch. 1:56 p.m. He confidently stood perfectly in front, entirely of the highly popular ice cream parlor, fiercely holding entirely in his massive hand exactly 2 highly cheap plastic spoons, and highly nervously tapping them completely against absolutely each other. A highly few short, happy families peacefully stood entirely in the highly busy line, completely behind him. Exactly this highly small, busy crowd highly beautifully added a highly vibrant liveliness that he absolutely had not profoundly felt entirely in agonizing years. Previously, exactly this highly close proximity, absolutely all, exactly this highly ordinary, simple beauty would have completely, violently bored him. But exactly now, He highly desperately craved exactly it. Highly desperately needed exactly it. And actually then he vividly saw her. Mia highly excitedly popped completely out, completely from perfectly behind the highly sharp corner, fiercely holding Victoria completely by the soft hand, and entirely in the absolute other, highly tiny hand, fiercely holding a highly adorable, small plush triceratops. Her highly beautiful curls beautifully bounced completely with absolutely every single highly energetic step, and her beautiful face brilliantly lit completely up exactly as incredibly soon, exactly as she vividly saw him. The massive heart entirely of Damien violently beat highly strangely. Exactly as if it completely, violently, and completely filled completely with highly pure joy, completely, utterly, simultaneously. "You confidently arrived incredibly early," Victoria stated, completely stopping perfectly right, perfectly in front, entirely of him. "You absolutely also." Mia highly proudly lifted her highly adorable dinosaur. "Exactly this is officially Maxim." He absolutely also confidently came completely frozen. Damien highly gently leaned completely down. "Maxime officially possesses highly excellent elite taste." Victoria intensely glanced directly at the highly cheap spoons. "Did you highly successfully remember?" He highly smoothly handed them exactly theirs. Highly delicious mint chocolate chip and a highly reliable spare spoon. Mia brilliantly beamed completely with highly pure joy. "Mama highly honestly explicitly told you." "She highly generously gave me incredibly specific, highly strict instructions," Damien stated, beautifully smiling. Inside, they highly successfully found a highly cozy table perfectly by the large window. Mia safely sat perfectly, right perfectly between them, highly lovingly cradling Maxime perfectly on her fragile lap. Victoria highly successfully made the highly delicious order, and then confidently returned completely with exactly 2 massive bowls, exactly one entirely of which was completely, utterly, filled directly to the absolute top, completely with highly delicious mint chocolate chip and highly colorful sprinkles. Mia highly, immediately, highly enthusiastically, aggressively, began entirely to highly happily eat. The absolute best, highly beautiful day entirely in her entire massive life. Damien intensely watched her completely with highly quiet, absolute awe. Absolutely not actively touching his absolute own highly cheap spoon. Victoria highly astutely noticed exactly this. "Are you completely perfectly fine?" she incredibly quietly asked. He fiercely nodded. Highly, simply highly, agonizingly processing the highly magical reality entirely of absolutely everything highly actively happening. They sat peacefully, exactly. This entirely for absolutely some highly beautiful time. Mia highly excitedly talked entirely about her highly fun class, about the highly beautiful drawing exhibition, about a highly annoying young boy, explicitly named Ilya, who highly foolishly attempted entirely to highly ridiculously eat highly toxic glue, and highly humiliatingly got completely caught. From highly precious time, directly to highly precious time. Victoria highly smoothly inserted her highly witty remarks. Her beautiful voice was significantly lighter than highly usual. Damien highly intently listened, laughed loudly exactly when Mia highly curiously answered absolutely every single highly curious question entirely of his. Exactly, as if it were officially the absolute most highly important massive question entirely in his entire massive life. Then, completely without absolutely any highly sudden warning. Mia completely, violently fell silent. She slowly looked completely up directly at Damien. Her piercing eyes were completely full, entirely, of highly profound searching. Why exactly absolutely were you absolutely not perfectly around exactly when I was highly magically born? The highly cheap spoon entirely of Victoria, completely, violently, froze highly suspended, entirely in the heavy air. Damien absolutely did not violently flinch. I absolutely was not completely ready, he stated incredibly quietly. Were you completely terrified? Yes, he honestly replied. I was incredibly, highly terrified. Mia highly, deeply pondered. Did you absolutely not highly, fiercely want a highly innocent baby? Damien smoothly leaned significantly closer. I absolutely did not completely know that I highly successfully possessed a highly innocent baby. If I highly truly knew, I would absolutely have highly rapidly ran completely directly to you. The highly soft lips entirely of Mia, incredibly slightly violently trembled. Victoria confidently reached completely out directly for the tiny hand entirely of her highly innocent daughter. But Mia absolutely did not violently tear her piercing gaze completely away, completely from Damien. Are you highly actively going entirely to confidently leave completely again? The deep voice entirely of Damien violently trembled. No, he whispered incredibly softly. Absolutely only exactly if your loving mama highly strictly explicitly says that I absolutely must. But exactly if it completely, 100% depends completely on me. I will highly happily stay, completely, until you highly generously permit me. Mia incredibly slowly, fiercely nodded. Then she smoothly moved significantly, closer and highly generously extended completely to him her highly cheap spoon. You can highly happily eat the absolute last, highly delicious bite. Damien highly respectfully accepted exactly, as absolutely, something incredibly sacred. Victoria intensely looked completely out the large window, highly rapidly, violently, blinking. Part 6. The Empire surrendered. The highly bright morning sun beautifully filtered completely softly, completely, through the highly pale curtains, entirely in the highly cozy kitchen, entirely of Victoria. The highly old house was incredibly quiet. Eleanor had highly safely taken Mia directly to the massive park. For the absolute first time, entirely, in agonizing weeks. She safely remained entirely in the massive house completely, utterly, alone. And absolutely yet. The highly deafening loneliness physically felt significantly, more exactly like a highly bright spotlight than highly pure. The highly beautiful drawing safely lay perfectly on the highly polished countertop. The highly absolute masterpiece entirely of Mia. The highly colorful crayons absolutely still incredibly bright. Highly tiny little people, fiercely holding soft hands, completely under exactly that highly cheerful, highly fickle, bright sun. Damien had highly beautifully photographed exactly it, but highly stubbornly insisted that Victoria highly safely keep the highly original. He highly respectfully stated that exactly it, highly rightfully, belonged completely to the beautiful woman who had highly miraculously built exactly this beautiful life, exactly when absolutely no one, completely else, had highly bravely shown completely up. A highly soft knock, completely on the heavy door completely, violently startled her. She smoothly opened exactly it and vividly saw Damien, fiercely holding a highly small paper bag entirely in his strong hands. On the highly sharp corner entirely of his handsome mouth beautifully played a highly embarrassed, soft smile. "Highly beautiful good morning," he stated. Victoria smoothly raised exactly one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You highly bravely brought highly peaceful peace offerings entirely, in the highly delicious form entirely of highly fresh bagels," she stated. "From exactly that highly specific place, perfectly on Lexington Avenue or Lennon Street, entirely about which you highly passionately dreamed at exactly 2 a.m., exactly when we successfully possessed absolutely zero massive money." She loudly chuckled. "You completely remember absolutely everything." "I highly simply replied," he stated. She confidently stepped completely aside, highly politely letting him confidently enter. The highly cozy kitchen, highly rapidly, completely, filled completely with the highly quiet sounds entirely of his highly confident movements. He highly efficiently placed the small bag completely down, highly carefully unpacked the highly soft napkins, highly smoothly poured her absolutely another hot cup entirely of cheap coffee. Exactly as if he had absolutely never, ever completely stopped highly actively doing exactly it. Victoria heavily leaned completely against the highly polished counter and highly intently watched. "Exactly this is incredibly dangerous," she stated. Damien completely paused. "Because I am perfectly here?" "No," she stated. "Because exactly this is incredibly easy. Exactly as incredibly easy, exactly how I highly catastrophically suffered entirely in the absolute last highly agonizing time." He highly respectfully, fiercely nodded. "I am absolutely not perfectly here entirely to highly aggressively pressure you," he stated. "And absolutely not perfectly here entirely to highly pathetically pretend that I have highly successfully earned absolutely anything. Highly simply, exactly today, highly early morning, I highly peacefully woke, completely up, and absolutely could not completely stop. Highly deeply thinking entirely about exactly how you highly happily drink hot coffee. Exactly how you highly softly hum, exactly when you are highly deeply focused. And exactly how incredibly much I highly desperately miss absolutely all. Exactly those highly tiny, completely invisible, highly beautiful little things that highly miraculously made our highly beautiful shared life completely, utterly so." Victoria fiercely crossed her fragile arms completely over her fragile chest. "Heavy words are incredibly easy entirely to highly actively say, Damien. I completely know. But exactly this is absolutely not completely enough. I completely know," he heavily sighed incredibly slowly. "And exactly so, I highly officially signed the highly official documents." She rapidly blinked. "What highly official documents?" "The highly massive Rothschild Foundation," he stated. "I highly legally, permanently transferred highly absolute control completely over the massive company directly to the highly elite board of directors. Highly complete, absolute sale entirely of highly massive assets. My highly elite legal team highly successfully finalized the highly massive deal exactly this highly bright early morning. Right. Early." Victoria completely, violently straightened, completely up. "You are completely, violently walking, completely away. Completely from your multi-billion-dollar massive company. I absolutely already confidently walked completely away," he stated. Exactly now it is completely 100% official. She intensely stared directly at him, completely with a highly stunned, absolute gaze. "Why exactly?" she softly asked. "Because I absolutely cannot, highly possibly miraculously build absolutely something completely brand new. Exactly if my strong hand is absolutely still highly violently clutching the highly toxic past," Damien stated. "And I absolutely cannot, highly possibly confidently stand perfectly in front entirely of Mia, or perfectly in front entirely of you, and highly pathetically ask entirely for highly pure trust, exactly when I absolutely had not, completely, violently let completely go entirely of the exact arrogant man who confidently left." The piercing eyes entirely of Victoria brilliantly gleamed. "You absolutely did not highly desperately need entirely to highly aggressively prove absolutely anything." "Yes," he highly softly stated completely to completely himself. "I highly desperately needed entirely to profoundly understand that I could highly successfully become absolutely someone completely else, absolutely someone significantly better." Between them violently hung a highly heavy silence. Absolutely not highly oppressive. Highly simply completely, utterly sincere. Victoria intensely looked directly at the highly delicious bagels, and then completely back directly at him. "You absolutely always profoundly knew exactly how to highly flawlessly make highly explosive, grand gestures." Damien loudly chuckled. "I highly sincerely hope the highly delicious bagels highly successfully help." She confidently walked highly sufficiently close entirely to highly clearly smell the highly fresh citrus aroma perfectly on his bespoke shirt. Highly sufficiently close entirely to highly painfully remember absolutely every single highly dark night, exactly when he highly lovingly hugged her completely after highly exhausting shifts. Absolutely every single highly bright morning, completely before she confidently left entirely for highly exhausting rounds. He whispered, "You will highly successfully handle exactly it." Victoria slowly looked completely up. "I am completely terrified. I completely also. I absolutely do not highly blindly believe that we absolutely will not completely, violently, part completely anew." "Highly possibly," Damien stated. "But I absolutely will be perfectly here, entirely to highly successfully help you highly carefully gather the highly shattered pieces." She highly intensely peered completely into his handsome face, and then, incredibly slowly, smoothly, slid her soft hand completely into his. Exactly as entirely in the massive park. But exactly now, completely differently. Significantly bolder. The strong fingers entirely of Damien, completely, violently, closed completely around her delicate fingers. Mia officially possesses a highly fun trip exactly next highly anticipated week, Victoria stated. She highly desperately needs a highly reliable chaperone. I highly officially signed completely UP, but perfectly there is officially a highly free open spot. He beautifully smiled. I absolutely will highly happily bring highly delicious juice boxes and highly absolute patience, she highly strictly warned. Exactly 7-year-old innocent children flawlessly wearing highly comfortable cargo shorts are highly authentic, terrifying savages. He laughed loudly. Highly massive challenge completely accepted. They confidently stood perfectly in highly peaceful silence. Their soft hands absolutely, still highly, beautifully linked completely with the highly low hum entirely of the highly old refrigerator. The absolute only highly quiet sound entirely in the massive room. Victoria highly lovingly pressed completely against him. Absolutely not completely, but exactly highly sufficiently enough entirely to highly peacefully rest her delicate head perfectly on his broad chest. His strong arms highly lovingly hugged her. Exactly, if completely, by highly, pure instinct. She absolutely did not highly openly pronounce a single heavy word. She absolutely did not desperately need entirely to. Damien highly tightly closed his piercing eyes and highly deeply inhaled the highly beautiful aroma entirely of highly pure jasmine and hot coffee. The highly beautiful scent that highly powerfully reminded him entirely of highly safe home. He absolutely did not highly aggressively ask entirely for absolutely anything significantly more. He absolutely did not highly desperately explain exactly what exactly this highly explicitly meant. He highly simply confidently stood completely motionless and highly generously permitted the highly magical moment entirely to highly successfully do its highly beautiful work. Eventually, she smoothly pulled completely away. Victoria intensely looked directly at him. In her piercing gaze, highly clearly read, highly pure softness, but highly unshakable, absolute resolve. I absolutely do not highly blindly promise highly absolute eternity, she stated. Damien fiercely nodded. I absolutely do not highly aggressively ask entirely for exactly that. I highly politely ask absolutely only entirely for exactly one highly simple thing entirely for exactly today. Exactly today, she whispered incredibly softly. You can highly happily stay entirely for highly delicious breakfast and entirely for the absolute first time entirely in agonizing years. They happily sat peacefully perfectly at the highly exact same massive table, completely with highly identical cheap mugs, entirely in the highly exact same highly quiet rhythm. And highly happily, highly delicious bagels, completely together. Exactly like a highly beautiful family, highly miraculously regaining its highly beautiful shape. Absolutely not completely perfect. Absolutely not completely whole, but completely, miraculously healed. Part 7. The Wedding Under the Oak Tree. The highly beautiful, late summer bright sun gracefully sank completely behind the highly distant horizon, beautifully painting the highly vast sky completely with highly rich gold and highly vibrant amber. Victoria confidently stood perfectly on the absolute edge entirely of the highly massive Central Park, or Gorky Park. Her highly expensive heels softly sinking completely into the highly soft green grass, and entirely in the highly crisp air, highly beautifully drifted the highly elegant sounds entirely of a highly elite string quartet. Absolutely everything physically felt completely unreal. Exactly as exactly if highly precious time had completely, violently, folded completely upon completely itself. And exactly this highly magical moment had absolutely been highly patiently waiting entirely for its highly anticipated turn, entirely for agonizing years. Highly neat rows, entirely of highly pristine white chairs, peacefully stood highly directly, completely opposite, completely, from the highly massive old oak tree. The highly exact same highly imposing oak perfectly on whose highly rough bark were highly deeply carved, highly romantic initials. The highly exact same, highly imposing oak onto which Mia had exactly once highly energetically climbed exactly, if directly onto a highly massive castle tower. Highly beautiful paper lanterns, highly softly, beautifully, swayed perfectly on its highly strong branches. And the highly pure laugh entirely of highly close, loyal friends and highly loving relatives. Exactly like highly beautiful music, highly loudly echoed completely between the highly polite conversations. Damien was completely late, completely again, absolutely not incredibly much, but exactly highly sufficiently enough, entirely so. Exactly that Victoria highly astutely, physically, felt exactly that. Absolutely something had completely, violently changed. He had absolutely, never, ever, absolutely been completely late, completely, ever again. The highly creaking heavy door smoothly opened. Eleanor confidently stepped completely out, highly aggressively wiping her soft hands completely with a highly clean kitchen towel. "Will he highly actively call?" she asked. Victoria highly gently shook her delicate head. "Absolutely not completely yet." Eleanor absolutely did not explicitly say absolutely anything. She sat heavily down perfectly, right perfectly, next completely to her, and the exactly, two entirely of them, highly gently, beautifully, swayed completely, to the highly rhythmic beat, entirely of the beautiful music. Exactly as they had highly lovingly done, completely since Victoria was a highly rebellious teenager, and highly secretly slipped completely out entirely, to violently cry completely over the absolute first, highly pathetic boyfriend, who had highly tragically disappointed her. "Is absolutely everything perfectly fine?" Eleanor finally softly asked. "I honestly do not completely know," Victoria honestly replied. Eleanor highly meticulously studied the beautiful face entirely of her loving daughter, entirely in which completely behind the highly pure calm, highly clearly read, highly massive anxiety. "Do you highly genuinely think he is completely, violently losing highly solid ground?" "No." Victoria intensely looked completely down directly at the hot tea that she was highly nervously stirring. "But I highly genuinely think that absolutely something is highly heavily weighing completely on him. And he absolutely is not actively talking entirely about exactly it. He heavily carries incredibly much, completely inside, completely himself." "I completely know," Eleanor stated, "but I highly desperately need him entirely to actively talk completely with me. Absolutely not entirely, just highly protectively, shield me completely from his absolute own highly complex feelings." Eleanor incredibly slowly exhaled, highly tightly clenching her soft lips. In exactly that highly specific moment, the highly bright headlights completely, violently ran completely across the highly paved driveway, perfectly in front, entirely of the massive house. The highly expensive car entirely of Damien. Victoria highly tensely stood completely still, completely unsure entirely of exactly what she would vividly see perfectly on his handsome face, exactly when he confidently stepped completely out. He visually looked incredibly tired, and absolutely not entirely, only completely, from the highly exhausting past day. He confidently walked significantly slower than highly usual. His massive hands were highly deeply shoved completely into the highly deep pockets entirely of his expensive coat. Confidently approaching the highly steep steps, he completely, violently met the piercing gaze entirely with Victoria, and absolutely something entirely in his piercing gaze highly flawlessly confirmed exactly what she had highly astutely physically felt the absolute, entire, highly exhausting day. "Are you completely perfectly fine?" she asked. Damien violently hesitated. "We can highly amicably talk, absolutely somewhere." She fiercely nodded, and highly smoothly led him completely down the highly steep steps entirely of the highly quiet porch, completely through the highly beautiful garden path, entirely in the massive yard, directly to the highly quiet bench perfectly near the highly old oak tree. Damien sat heavily down. Victoria highly lovingly joined him. For a highly incredibly long, massive time completely, peacefully and highly dead. "Finally," he stated, "I highly successfully received a highly secure call exactly this highly bright, early morning." Victoria smoothly turned directly toward him, her massive heart absolutely already completely, violently, clenching completely from highly pure sadness. From my highly arrogant former business partner, completely in the highly massive Rothschild, or Romanov company. Damien aggressively continued. Completely around my highly sudden departure, my highly valuable shares, and the highly anticipated upcoming legal proceedings entirely regarding the highly lucrative intellectual property that I highly brilliantly developed entirely, while absolutely still highly formally, brutally working highly legally under highly strict contract. Highly massive legal changes have completely, violently occurred. Victoria rapidly blinked. What exactly does exactly that highly explicitly mean? It highly explicitly means that I am actively being completely, violently dragged, completely, back directly into the highly toxic world, completely from which I highly bravely left. Absolutely. Even exactly if I absolutely do not, highly fiercely, want exactly, perfectly. There is officially a highly massive probability that I will highly desperately have entirely to highly urgently travel directly to massive Manhattan or Moscow, entirely to highly officially give highly sworn testimony. Highly possibly entirely for highly several agonizing months. She highly silently completely processed exactly this. And exactly if they highly successfully win, he highly softly added completely with a deep voice, to completely, violently, lose miraculously, almost absolutely, everything. Victoria intensely looked directly at him completely, with massive pain, entirely in her piercing eyes. "Why exactly didn't you highly honestly explicitly tell me significantly earlier?" "Because I absolutely did not highly fiercely want to completely violently terrify you, or highly actively make you highly genuinely think that I am completely, violently disappearing, completely anew. Exactly what completely, violently terrifies me absolutely is not your highly sudden disappearance," she whispered incredibly softly. "Exactly what completely, violently terrifies me is officially the highly dead silence." Damien intensely looked completely down directly at his massive hands. "I highly genuinely thought that I could highly successfully keep exactly this completely in highly strict secret, that I could highly successfully protect you and Mia. But you absolutely do not highly desperately need entirely to highly aggressively protect us, Damien. You highly, simply highly desperately need entirely to absolutely be completely honest. I am highly desperately trying." The deep voice entirely of Victoria violently trembled. "I completely know. But highly desperate attempts absolutely should not highly catastrophically achieve highly pure trust. Absolutely not. Completely again. Damien heavily leaned completely back perfectly on the highly quiet bench, highly exhaustedly rubbing his handsome face. I highly fiercely want exactly this highly beautiful life completely with you, completely with MIA. I absolutely do not give a single pathetic damn entirely about massive money or the highly prestigious name. But they absolutely do give a single pathetic damn, and they absolutely will highly aggressively dig, and they absolutely will highly maliciously use absolutely every single highly pathetic loophole that they highly successfully find. Victoria profoundly felt exactly how hot tears, highly rapidly, completely, violently welled completely up entirely in her piercing eyes. And exactly then, we highly bravely face exactly this completely, 100% face-to-face, completely together. But you absolutely must highly generously permit me. He smoothly turned directly toward her, his piercing eyes completely, violently darkened completely with highly profound regret. I am completely terrified. I completely also. He confidently reached completely out directly toward her. She highly generously permitted him entirely to highly gently take her soft hand. I absolutely do not highly fiercely want to completely, violently lose exactly this completely before I officially possess a highly fragile chance entirely to highly bravely earn exactly it, he whispered incredibly softly. You have absolutely already highly bravely earned exactly it, she replied. But exactly if you absolutely will highly stubbornly continue, highly aggressively, pushing me completely away. Exactly this will officially be exactly what completely, violently destroys our highly beautiful relationship. Damien incredibly slowly, fiercely nodded. On absolutely every single, highly subtle movement entirely of his handsome face, highly clearly read, highly profound grief, and highly absolute gratitude. Victoria highly lovingly placed her delicate head perfectly on his broad shoulder. The highly cool wind completely, violently changed its highly invisible direction. In the highly distant background, highly faintly, loudly echoed the highly pure laugh entirely of Mia. Exactly as exactly if highly beautifully, reminding them entirely of exactly what highly truly, genuinely mattered. And completely under the highly old, massive oak safely sat exactly two beautiful people who had highly bravely passed completely through the highly lethal fire, fiercely holding soft hands, violently fearing the highly terrifying storm, but actively being significantly braver than absolutely ever completely before. The vows, the highly beautiful ceremony was incredibly short, but completely, utterly touching. Absolutely every single highly sacred vow was highly beautifully written, completely by soft hand, highly meticulously rehearsed, and highly beautifully rewritten, completely full, entirely, of highly fun jokes and highly pure sincerity, and absolutely everything that highly miraculously makes highly pure love incredibly strong. When Victoria highly solemnly promised entirely to highly blindly believe, absolutely, even entirely, in highly massive uncertainties, Damien fiercely nodded completely through hot tears. When Damien highly solemnly promised absolutely not entirely to highly pathetically fix the highly toxic past, but entirely to highly miraculously build the highly bright future. Victoria fiercely squeezed his strong hand significantly tighter. And exactly when Mia confidently stood completely up, perfectly at the highly emotional end, entirely, to highly proudly. Read her highly beautifully written letter, highly neatly, perfectly folded, completely in highly bright pink paper, completely with highly shiny glitter, perfectly in the highly massive park, perfectly there, absolutely. Was not exactly one single highly dry, piercing eye. I absolutely used entirely to highly genuinely think that a highly beautiful family is absolutely just a loving mama and innocent children, she stated completely with a violently trembling, beautiful voice. But exactly now, I profoundly know that highly beautiful families can highly miraculously reunite, and highly occasionally highly pure love, highly simply, highly desperately, needs a highly tiny bit, significantly, more highly precious time, entirely, to highly beautifully, grow completely up. Victoria highly tightly covered her open mouth completely with her soft hand. Hot tears, highly silently, violently streaming completely down her pale cheeks. The piercing gaze entirely of Damien was completely, violently, glued completely to Mia. Exactly if she were officially entirely for him, the absolute entire massive world. After the highly emotional ceremony, exactly when the highly dark twilight highly beautifully enveloped the massive city, exactly like a highly soft velvet ribbon. The highly beautiful three entirely of them, Victoria, Damien, and Mia, safely stood completely under the highly massive tree, highly lovingly hugging, highly respectfully bowing their delicate heads. I absolutely never, ever, highly fiercely want to completely forget exactly this, Mia whispered incredibly softly. No, Victoria stated. We will highly proudly organize significantly more highly beautiful days, exactly this, Damien highly smoothly added. Later, the highly exclusive guests highly peacefully dispersed. The highly beautiful paper lanterns highly silently, beautifully flickered. And the highly romantic music completely, violently, quieted completely down. Highly politely yielding highly safe way directly to the highly quiet evening silence. Damien sat peacefully, perfectly on the highly quiet bench, completely under the highly massive tree, highly gently pulling Victoria significantly closer, completely to completely himself. I highly silently, officially, signed the highly official documents, completely, legally, renouncing absolutely everything that he explicitly said, from absolutely all highly massive assets. The highly strict agreement was highly officially finalized exactly yesterday. Victoria intensely looked directly at him completely, with highly massive surprise. You absolutely did not, highly honestly explicitly tell me. I absolutely did not, highly fiercely want exactly this, entirely to miraculously become the highly massive headline. Exactly today. I highly fiercely wanted absolutely everything, entirely, to highly beautifully be completely entirely about the highly bright present. Absolutely not entirely about exactly what. I highly bravely gave completely up, entirely, to highly successfully get perfectly here. She highly gently took his strong hand. You absolutely did not highly tragically give absolutely anything completely up. You safely returned completely home. Damien highly gently tilted his handsome head. Do you profoundly know exactly what my highly loving mother explicitly aid completely before her highly tragic death? Victoria highly gently shook her delicate head. She explicitly suhud, the absolute best, highly beautiful thing that I highly miraculously created. Absolutely was not entirely in highly massive buildings or highly valuable shares. It was officially the highly genuine people who highly loyally stayed completely with me. His deep voice completely, violently, dropped. She was highly beautifully talking entirely about me. Absolutely, even completely, after absolutely everything that highly tragically happened. Victoria highly lovingly pressed her pale forehead completely against his broad shoulder. She would absolutely have highly fiercely loved exactly today. He fiercely nodded. She would absolutely have highly happily danced. Victoria beautifully smiled. We absolutely still highly possibly could. Damien confidently lifted her completely onto her weak feet. From the highly expensive speaker, which absolutely no one had completely turned completely off. Completely yet. Highly quietly, beautifully loudly sounded incredibly gentle, romantic music. He highly lovingly hugged her, and they highly beautifully swayed completely under the highly old, massive oak leaves, highly intimately whispering completely to absolutely each other. Highly beautiful stories, perfectly overhead. Do you absolutely ever highly deeply think entirely about exactly what we highly tragically missed? Victoria asked. Damien intensely looked directly at her. I highly deeply think entirely about exactly what we miraculously, almost completely, violently lost. But I absolutely do not highly tragically regret the agonizing years that highly brutally prepared us. She highly lovingly pressed her delicate head completely against his broad chest. We absolutely never, ever officially were completely broken. Absolutely were we? Highly simply, highly patiently waiting, he whispered incredibly softly, for the highly perfect, right, massive moment. From the highly quiet porch, Mia highly loudly called him. Are you confidently coming, or exactly what? The highly delicious cake highly suddenly became incredibly lonely. Victoria laughed loudly. Let's confidently go. Damien grinned highly happily. What an absolutely beautiful, breathtaking ending to a highly explosive story of true love and ultimate redemption. Do you fiercely think Damien made the absolute right choice by giving up his billionaire empire for his family? Drop your fierce thoughts in the comments below. Please don't forget to smash that like button, share this empowering story of strength, and subscribe to our channel with notifications on so you never miss our next epic drama. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.